What's up, everybody? Welcome to some Green-Black Savage Constrictor. Hope you're ready to get your +1 counter on. Yeah, I've encountered this deck a few times on Magic Online, and it's also a really popular deck in Standard right now with the Windy Constrictor out there. But basically, this deck in a nutshell is we're looking to get down a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna break down the cards a little bit better once we jump into the deck tech. But long story short, we're looking to get a bunch of creatures out there where +1 counters matter. Then we're looking to get some effects out there that say, hey, if you put a counter on there, put an additional one on there when you put one on there. So basically, if you put one counter on a creature, you're going to put another one on there. So it's going to be 2 +1 counters. So basically, we're using that overall theme of putting counters on creatures to abuse that effect and get into spots of where we are running a combo, not necessarily a in-the-game combo. It can be a combo depending on what the board state is. But we're kind of running all in combo with one of the enchantment pieces that we're running. And you can also just go straight value with some of the creatures. But that's the deck in a nutshell, but let's kind of look at it into a little bit deeper. So we're running an enchantment called Hardened Scales. If one or more +1 counters will be placed on a creature you control, that many +1 counters, that many plus one +1 counters are placed on it instead. So if we have a creature on the battlefield, we go to put a +1 counter on it. We're going to put 2 on there because Hardened Scales is out there. Let's say that we have 2 Hardened Scales on the battlefield. We go to put a +1 counter on a creature. That's going to be 3 total +1 counters that get put on it. So basically, it's just if you put a +1 counter on it, put another one on there. We're also running Windy Constrictor in the deck. Same thing as the Hardened Scales ability. If you're going to put a +1 counter on a creature or an artifact, put another one on there. So you can see where if we have Hardened Scales on the battlefield, Windy Constrictor, we cast something like Hangerback Walker for 1 into the battlefield with the +1 counter. It's going to enter the battlefield as a 3/3 if we simply just have Windy Constrictor and Hardened Scales on the battlefield. We're also running Metallic Mimic. So as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen creature type in addition to its other types. Then whenever another creature you control, the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1 counter on it. So let's say we get this down, we name Construct, which Walking Ballista is a construct. We name Construct, it's going to enter the battlefield with an additional counter. Then once you have the Hardened Scales out there and the Winding Constrictor, just really amplifies those counters out. Alright, so that's basically all the cards in the deck that we have that generate an extra effect for +1 counter. These are the payoff... Sorry about that. These are the payoff creatures that really take advantage of the +1 counters being put on them. We're running Walking Ballista. Whenever it enters the battlefield with the X +1 counters on it, 4 mana, put a +1 counter on it, and then remove a 1 +1 counter from it. It deals 1 damage to target creature or player. We're also running Hangerback Walker. Whenever it enters the battlefield with X +1 counters on it, and then whenever it dies, create X/1/1 colorless stop to artifact creature tokens for each +1 counter that's on it. So basically, we're running these value creatures in there. We can win the game through a combo with Walking Ballista and Rite of Passage, dealing damage to it. I'll cover that in a little bit later in the deck tech. But yeah, we do have it set up to where we can really take advantage of these creatures out here. We're also running Arcbound Ravager. So let's say we sacrifice an artifact, we can shift those counters around, put a +1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. If we have 2 of those amplifying effects, we can simply sacrifice 1 creature, and that's going to be 2 more counters on Arcbound Ravager. Then we can sacrifice Arcbound to itself to put those counters on a Walking Ballista, and then we can go lethal from there, removing the +1 counters, kind of deal it to our opponent. So the deck is very much set up in getting as many counters as we can on the Walking Ballista, Hangerback, and then using the Arcbound Ravager. It's kind of a little bit of a tricky way to kind of sleight of hand increase the number of counters we're moving around by sacrificing our creatures and moving them around. But, alright, let's jump to the Walking Ballista part. So, basically, you can remove a +1 counter from Walking Ballista, and then you can deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Now, this works with Rite of Passage. So, this is a 3-mana enchantment. It says, whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, put a +1 counter on it. Doesn't matter where that damage came from. It doesn't have to come from our opponent. It can come from us. So, let's say that we get down Walking Ballista, and it has 3 +1 counters on it, and we have Rite of Passage. So, we remove a +1 counter from Walking Ballista, deal 1 damage to itself. Rite of Passage is going to trigger and say, hey, put a +1 counter on there. As long as we have at least Winding Constrictor or Hardened Scales on the battlefield, we're going to get 2 counters on there. And basically, you're going to get into spots where you can just keep pinging 1 damage to Walking Ballista and get into spots where you can have a lethal Walking Ballista. Let's say that you only have 1 amplifying effect on the battlefield. You'll kind of get into spots where you'll have to pass the turn because you're going to have those damage count. You're always going to get ahead on counters, but when you go to remove them, You get into spots where you're going to remove it into its own damage counters, so you can actually make it big enough to where you can pass the turn, and then during their upkeep, you can activate in response. Or if you simply have more than one or two or three of the amplifying effects on the battlefield, you'll get into this spot very slowly to where you can remove them off. You can remove the +1 counters and close it out, even in response to some sort of removal from your opponent. So, but it's in there just strictly for value, but you can combo off with the Rite of Passage. Hangerback Walker, mainly in here as a way, as a nice little sack outlet for the Arcbound Ravager, but those the Thopters that you generate off the Hangerback Walker are actually pretty good. You can get into spots where you can just go Thopter control, you get Hangerback down for like a 2/2 or 3/3, kind of shift those counters over there. They use their piece of removal, and the next thing you know, you're just on the Thopter beat sticks gameplay. And so I won a few games with just going Thopter beat sticks, so it's definitely really good value in the deck. As far as an additional +1 counter, we are running Savage Summoning. Really cool card for the deck. Savage Summoning cannot be countered. The next creature card you cast this turn can be cast as though it had Flash, and then that spell can't be countered. That creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1 counter on it. So let's say that we go turn 1, we go Hardened Scales. Turn 2, we go Winding Constrictor. Turn 3, we get down another Winding Constrictor. So we've got 3 amplifying effects on the battlefield. At the end of our opponent's turn, we cast Savage Summoning using our last mana, and then we get to cast either Hangerback or Walking Ballista for free. Basically, cast it as a 0/0. It's going to enter the battlefield as an additional +1 counter from the Savage Summoning, and then when it gets that additional +1 counter, it's going to trigger 3 more times between the two walking, the Winding Constrictors and the Hardened Scales. So Savage Summoning is one of those cards that even on turn 1, you can just cast a let's say you go Forest turn 1, you have Savage Summoning and Walking, you have Hangerback Walker in your hand. Your opponent does their thing, they go Serum Visions, whatever. Into their turn, you cast Savage Summoning, get down Hangerback Walker, and then it'll be online to get down another. You can tap it to put a +1 counter on there and start getting those Thopters up and running as early as turn 2. So pretty good, and especially if your turn 2 play is something like a Winding Constrictor, you have to pay 1 mana, but you get into the spots where you can just kind of just flash in that quick little Hangerback Walker and get some cheap activations on it at the beginning of your next turn. Cover the Rite of Passage combo. Other than that, that's kind of the core of the deck. As far as the utility spells in the deck, we are running Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. The +1 ability is really good if we kind of need to dirtle to get into a Rite of Passage, but the -2 ability is really good. Once again, if we have the Hardened Scales, just any combo, even like just 2 copies of the Hardened Scales or Winding Constrictor, some variation of that, put a +1 counter on each creature you control. If you sacked a Hangerback Walker and you have a bunch of Thopters out there, you're going to get into spots where you can kind of develop a nice little lethal board state simply just by minusing Nissa, getting her down for 2. So she's really good early game, and she's also really good late game if you have a bunch of stuff out there. We're also running Liliana the Veil, 2 copies of this. Pretty standard, just green-black, just kind of a way to... you're really looking to dump a lot of stuff early game. You're looking to get down your Hardened Scales, Winding Constrictors, get your Walking Ballistas out of your hand. So it's really, if you have Liliana, you can run it in the deck. If you want to build this deck and you don't necessarily have your playsets or you don't have a copy of Liliana, you could probably go ahead and go, I think Predator Ooze. It's the 3 mana indestructible creature that gets a +1 counter on it in place of it, and just kind of go more of a Friday Night Magic style deck. But if this is something you're kind of build into a tournament deck, Liliana the Veil is really good in the deck in that we're looking to empty as much stuff out, and then once we get Liliana down, we kind of put some pressure on our opponent to make them start discarding some cards. We're also running Lotlet Troll. This is one of those, a pretty fun card, man. You get him down, he has Trample, which is really good. Discard a creature card, put a +1 counter on him, and then for 1 black mana, regenerate him. So once again, if you have Hardened Scales or the Winding Constrictor out there, you can start chunking those extra creatures out of your hands, and every creature you chunk is going to be 2 more counters. So simply getting down Lotlet Troll with a Hardened Scales out there, chunking 1 creature is going to turn it from a 2/1 into a 4/3 with Trample, and then the regeneration clause. So Lotlet Troll's pretty good. He'll steal you some games sometimes. You can kind of get on this like Lotlet Troll beat stick game plan. And we're also running Scavenging Ooze, just a little bit of a utility creature. Exile a creature card from a graveyard. If you do, put a +1 counter on it. Once again, if we have any of the Winding Constrictor or Hardened Scales, we're going to get that amplifying effect out of it. That's the utility spells. We are running 4 copies of Ancient Stirrings. It allows us to kind of late game dig for, let's say we have Rite of Passage down and we just need to find a Walking Ballista to combo off. This is going to allow us to look at the top 5 cards of our library, or since we're only running 20 lands, we can get into spots where we can kind of use it to mana fix. We're running 4 copies of Hardened Scales, the Savage Summoning, Liliana the Veil. think pretty much that's the deck in a nutshell. It's just basically looking to get down a Hardened Scales, Winding Constrictor, and they're just generating a lot of value, either going infinite with the Walking Ballista or just going value with the Hangerback Walkers. So that's the deck in a nutshell. I've got 4 gameplay videos up there for you, so be sure and check them out. And if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.